We are continuing our little sermon series on the miracles of Elisha, and today we're going to look at the Shunammite's son restored to life. I had a story about this guy who goes to the vet with his dog. His dog had died, but he didn't want to admit the dog was dead, and he just wouldn't accept the fact that the dog was dead. So he goes to the vets and he's demanded two opinions. And so the vet gets a cat. The cat goes over to the dead dog, gives it a sniff, and goes, meow. And the vet says, yep, the cat agrees the dog is dead. So he gets another opinion. This time a dog comes in, goes over to the other dog, sniffs it and goes, woof, woof. The vet says, yep, the dog is definitely dead. And so the owner doesn't agree with the three opinions at all, but he has to accept the fact his dog is dead. So he gets up and he leaves, and as he's going out the door, he looks at the bill, and the bill is astronomical, huge, and he can't believe why it's so big. So he goes back in and says to the vet, I don't understand why my bill is so big. The vet says, well, you did ask for a CAT scan and a lab report. I thought it was. I thought it was at least one giggle worth.
That's an old one.
The last time we were together, we looked at the miracle which Elisha performed, if you remember, to bless a widow and her sons with the oil that's filled many jars. Today we're going to look at two miracles. The first one being the Shunammite woman and her husband who couldn't have any children, but God's going to label that to happen. And we'll say a little bit about that, not too much. But the second miracle is what we're going to focus on a lot of time on, where her son dies at a really young age, and he's going to be miraculously brought back to life by Elisha. So if you've got your Bibles, turn there to 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning in verse 8. We're just going to summarise what's going on here. We're not going to read the text as such. Okay, we're going to summarise what's happening here. So here we read of a woman who begged Elisha to eat a meal with her. And so whenever Elisha was in the area, he would sit down and have a meal with her. Eventually, she asked her husband to make a room so that Elisha could stay whenever he needed to do so. But what I love about this woman is her faith. She could have reaped many benefits from having Elisha come and visit her, but instead, she used it as an opportunity to glorify God and serve God. She knows that Elisha is a holy man of God, and so she offers him hospitality. She gives him some food. She gets a room fitted out with everything he needs whenever he needs to return and stay there. And so with all of this kindness going on, Elisha was moved. He wanted to do something nice for her in return. And so his servant, a guy called Gehazi, noticed that she had no children. And Elisha told her that she would embrace her son this time next year. But she thinks she's been misled. Remember, I'm just summarising what's happening here. And so, back in Bible times, if you didn't have any children, it was classed as being out of favour with God. That's what people saw it as. And people would often look down at you and treat you like an outcast if you didn't have any children. And so we can imagine that she's really excited and happy when Elisha tells her, listen, you're going to embrace her son this time next year. And so a year goes by and she gives birth to her son. But don't miss the miracle in this part here. She was a woman, probably of older age, who couldn't have children. And so the miracle that's happened here is kind of similar to Sarah with Abraham and things. In their old age, that God gave her the bodily strength to conceive and give birth to her son. So, we carry on. Verse 18 to 31, and again we're just going to summarise this. The first time we read in this verse is that the child grew. That doesn't mean he became an adult. Okay? He was very, very young, a small boy, and we know that because the servant easily carried him to Elisha's private room. And so this young boy, he's out in the field, and he has a complaint. He's got a complaint about his head. We don't know exactly what the complaint was all about or what the ailment was. Some people think it was maybe sunstroke or something like that, but we don't know. But whatever it is, ended up and resulted in his death. But let's pause for a moment and think about this. We can only imagine the devastation that they are both feeling right now. They weren't able to have children. God through Elisha enables them to have children. And we're only talking maybe 8-9 years later, he dies. Can you imagine what's going through their minds? Their son, their one and only son, is now gone. I would imagine the grief would be too much for them to bear. But we're not told what kind of help the Shunammite woman expected from Elisha in these verses. But it's clear that she's not willing to admit that her son was dead. Just like the story with the dog at the very start, yeah? You see the link now? She wasn't willing to admit her son was dead. And so she said, I'm not going to admit anything until I appeal to Elisha first. And so when she reached him at Mount Carmel, she took hold of his feet. And it appears that she was looking for some kind of words of comfort from the prophet. But instead of receiving words of comfort, she received word that everything is going to be well. Elisha's servant, Gehazi, did as Elisha told him to do, but he did so in vain, because sadly the boy remained dead. And so he has to go back to inform Elisha. And it's now that we pick up our story in verse 32 to 37. Again, we just read it, so I'm not going to read word for word again. But what happens is, when Elisha reaches the house, he finds the boy dead. And he enters the room, he shuts the door, and he prays. Notice that he lays upon the boy in some kind of strange manner. Now, it's difficult to know from the text whether he's trying to bring the boy back to life at this point in time, or maybe he's just showing remorse over the death of his mother's son. We don't know. But one thing is sure, that God has got one thing in mind here, and that's to raise the boy back to life. Why sneeze 7 times? Your guess is as good as mine. Okay? It seems strange, but the whole thing is happening here is very strange, isn't it? The very fact you lay on top of him. But you'll notice that she took her son and she went out. Now, why would she do that? Well, I'm sure, like all of us, that this was been a time of celebration, where she wanted to share the wonderful news about her son with her friends and with her neighbours. And I'm also sure that she wanted to go out and give credit and glory to God for the amazing thing that Elisha has just done. And so this in turn would, again, like we did with the last sermon, would let people know that Elisha wasn't a false prophet. He was a true prophet. And we know that he was a true prophet because God was working through him. Excuse me. There are only 3 resurrection stories recorded in the Old Testament. 3 of them are on the sheet here. And resurrection stories are not as common as we think. When you get to the New Testament, there's actually about 7 resurrection stories recorded there for us. So this is not unusual within itself, but it's not like a thing that happens every day of the week, if you wish, with the resurrection stories. But when I was looking at all this, I was thinking, well, what lessons can we learn from this event today? What can we learn from this lady? Well, the first thing I think is use what you have. You see, the Shunammite woman used what she had to be a blessing for others. Notice when you go back to verse 8 through to 10, it says, one day Elisha went to Shunammite, and a well-to-do woman was there who asked him to stay for a meal. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in a bed and a table, a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. So what starts off as a simple invitation for a meal turned out into her opening up in her home, almost like a hotel or a bed and breakfast. It's a wonderful story. Yes, she was well-to-do, which basically is another way of saying that she was financially secure. But just like the widow, who was poor and only had one small jar of oil, she did everything she could with everything she had to bless Elisha. I think we totally underestimate the power of hospitality. I think we do. Remember what Paul tells us. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. You see, as God's children, we too should practice hospitality and use what we have to bless other people around us. Okay, you might not have be able to offer somebody accommodation in your home. You maybe not got space for that. But you can certainly invite them in for a meal, can't you? To your home. You might not be able to invite a homeless person into your house for a meal. But you can certainly go to them and give them a sandwich and a drink, can't you? See, hospitality is very important. And it's a great way of blessing others. Remember what Jesus said. He said, even if you give somebody a cup of water in his name, you'll be blessed later with a reward, he says. And so, every day you live is a gift of grace from God, and it's to be used to invest in people. How are you investing your time? How are you investing your finances? Is it on self or others? The second thing we learn from this is to be content with what you have. The Shunammite woman was really content with what she had. Look at verse 13. Elisha said to her, tell her, you have gone to all of this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army? And she replied, I have a home among my own people. Now notice Elisha asked her what he could do for her. Elisha thought that she wanted him to speak to the king or the commander of the king's army on her behalf. But think about this for a moment. It's not every day a prophet comes into your home. It's not every day a prophet comes into your presence and actually say to you, is there anything I could do for you? What an incredible moment that must have been and all of that. But you'll notice, what did she ask for? Nothing. She asked for nothing. She was content with what she had. She already recognized how blessed she was. She was blessed financially, secure enough to offer Elisha a meal. She was blessed with a house big enough to offer him a room. She and her husband had no children, remember. And she never even asked for a child. She never even asked for a child. Notice in verse 15 and 16, then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and she stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha says, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. You see, even though she could have asked Elisha for a child, she didn't. But it's clear from her reaction here that it's something that her heart's desired. In other words, God knows our desires better than we do sometimes, and better than we're willing to admit. He knows what's deep within us. And like many women today, you know, it appears that they maybe been trying for a child for years and years and years. But just got to the point where we're just going to have to accept we can't have any children. What about you? How content are you with what God has blessed you with? You know, one of the greatest disgraces of our day is the amount of ungrateful Christians we have in our day. We're a little bit like the story I heard about this rich guy who's walking down the stairs in his house one day, and he heard one of his servants say, "Oh, if I only had £5, I would be content." So he overheard her and thought he would make her day. He reaches into his wallet, takes out £5 and gives it to her. So as he's walking away, he went round the corner and he stopped to listen, to see if she'd give thanks to God for it. But all he heard with discontentment was the words, "Oh, why didn't I ask for £10? You see, I think sometimes like that, we're like that with our Lord God. He does nothing but pour out blessing after blessing after blessing. He meets our needs on a daily basis, and instead of being content with what we've got, we often say, "Well, why can't I have a little bit more?" See, we can spend our entire life striving for more and more and more. And what's going to happen? The result is this. You miss being satisfied with what you've got today. That's the problem with that. So we need to learn to be content. And finally, we need to evaluate what is important. You know, the story of the Shunammite woman doesn't finish back in those early passages of Kings. You have to go over to chapter 8. In chapter 8, verse 1 and 2, it reads this. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years." The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. You see, what we see here, or read here, is Elisha warning the Shunammite woman to leave her home, to leave her homeland, because there's going to be a famine that's going to last 7 years. And notice that once again, she didn't hesitate to do what Elisha told her to do. She and her family left everything behind. Now again, let's pause and think about this. Can you imagine what it would be like for her and her family to leave everything behind? I can't imagine that. I've never experienced that. I think maybe Olga's experienced leaving everything behind. But not many people have. But we see it happening right in front of our eyes on the television screen all the time, don't we? Where people are fleeing from their homes. And they're fleeing from their country because it's become war-torn. We see it in front of our eyes where people have had to flee from their homes because of volcanoes and floods. We even have it here in the UK when the floods come, don't we? Can you imagine what it's like to have to live there for 7 years? You see, she had to evaluate what was important in her life. And think about this. You know, what good is it to have a great home if you've got no food to eat in it? What good is it to have a family if you can't even feed them? You see, if you invest all your time in building a beautiful home, or getting the latest car, or protesting about the state the world is in, you're going to be in for a shock when Christ returns. Do you know why? Because all of that stuff is going to be burned up. It's going to be incinerated when Jesus comes back. So I think it'd be better to invest your life in something eternal. You see, the Shunammite woman didn't treasure her house, and she didn't treasure her land. And we shouldn't treasure our worldly things either. And we see that because she quite willingly left it all. Are we quite happy to leave things behind? You see, if we hold on tightly to worldly things, it could end up costing you your life. So let me encourage you to use what you have to bless others. No matter how little it is, God can do great things through that. Let me encourage you to be content with the blessings that God has already given you and the blessings He gives you for today. Be content with that. Let me encourage you to evaluate what's important in your life. What's really important. Invest in things. Invest in things which are eternal. God bless you.